expected there to be more fire. Thank you, everyone. It's my distinct pleasure to be here today with Vic Neufeld, who's president and CEO of Aphria. Since we don't have a lot of time today, I'm going to dive right in, and I wanted to start with something that's been in the headlines. So this past week, Queen's Park announced it will allow private retailers, and not the LCBO as originally planned, to sell rec cannabis in Ontario as of next spring. So what was your reaction to that, Vic?
A bit frustrating. A lot of plans have been laid for a massive rollout on October 17th. Ontario, probably about 50% of the Canadian marketplace. But when I say frustrating, one has to understand the clock was already far too long. And Premier Wynn's plan, totally uprooted by Premier Ford. It's not a bad thing. We can live with either scenario as it would have unfolded. The problem is they were never going to have enough time for the build out of rec, the brick and mortar, and the necessary police enforcement, et cetera, et cetera. So frustrating, yet Premier Ford is going to get it right, and stakeholder engagements are good, and we're all waiting for the running rules, quite frankly. It's interesting to understand how the dynamics of different licensed producers and the sound bites that they're throwing out there. But I can tell you from the Aphria story, many months ago we adopted the profile that west of Ontario and east of Ontario, for those provinces that allowed privatization, the diversity of the geography, the running rules that Manitoba versus Alberta, BC is still a question mark today. We decided to really align our interests with those retail horses that had experience and had the capabilities and commitment and understanding of, I know it's a broad expression, but running the cash register. It wasn't our core competency.
How realistic do you think spring 2019 is?
Oh, it will be. Unless, of course, the engagement with stakeholders by Premier Ford takes too long. I mean, if he can really move the needle quick, I think within a 2-month period, if there's enough road mapping, it can happen. And I say so because there are so many entrepreneurial retail establishments, and I'll be very broad so no one jots down, oh, he said this. Whether it's a coffee shop, a donut shop, a small pharmacy, independent, I mean, the list goes on and on. These already exist, and assuming the 300 meters from hospital, park, school, daycare, nursing home, and meth clinic, whatever those rules are, there are many locations. But now the municipalities have to get into the fray of things. So for example, let's take beautiful city of Windsor. Originally it was getting 1. Is this now meaning we're getting 4 or 5 in the city of Windsor? What are those? And does the council of the City of Windsor have influence over this? So a lot of stuff has to happen quickly, but it can be done. Because landlord leases, for the most part, are already there. Yeah. Landlord compliancy, if it allowed the sale of cannabis, it's leasehold improvements, and then the staffing, the hiring, the training, the securitization. That can happen rather quickly. It's funny how money can move the needle rather fast.
It's true. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what I think is sort of one of the more exciting aspects of this. You know, while I think the real potential and innovation is coming kind of in the future with new products and the possibility of, you know, any number of products. And I wanted to ask you kind of if you could tell us about Aphria's efforts when it comes to product innovation.
Yeah. So first of all, and as previous panel members have said, it starts with a supply chain of quality, critical mass, low-cost producers so that when it becomes a little more commoditized, you are in control of the input material. It's very important to the Aphria story, and again, being low-cost producer. You then take that to the next level, the oil technology of extraction. There's many versions and many iterations, right down to the final refinement of, is it water soluble or is it crystals and powder? I mean, that's where our center of excellence is going. You need that because that will drive the ability or capability of those end new products that aren't allowed today. And I'm not talking about vape pens. That's well in the can and fully capable tomorrow to sell in Canada. I'm talking about other disruptors, K-cups to tea bags, to other certain forms of edibles, and eventually into beverages. So it's the technology that's important. You've got to get it right. If you don't have the input material, it's going to be very costly. So when you combine these two attributes, you're going to be well positioned and flexible enough to handle whatever diverse product intakes Health Canada is going to allow.
And what has Aphria's sort of approach and strategy been in that regard?
So what we have done is, without tipping the iceberg too much,
Too much away.
I'll have to bring everybody over the wall soon. The innovation is, I'm not going to go back and repeat on technology of extraction and the winterization and the purification. All of that has to happen. And I don't know where many licensed producers are. It takes commitment, capital, and people to make that happen. But at the end, if you understand where do you want to go with product introductions that are more logical from a Health Canada perspective. So are we now in Leamington, Ontario, beautiful Leamington, Ontario, capable of making gummy bears? Absolutely we are. I mean, it's part of who we are in terms of really making sure that we've got a lot of technical resources on staff. The chocolate bars, the kitchen, the roastery, yeah, just make that assumption. But it's what's after that. And it's just not the product formulation and the manufacturing instructions, the recipe. You also sometimes need that little edge, and that's where you align your interests with brands, global brands that bring that identity. I said tea, so is it David's Tea? Yeah. I mentioned chocolate bars. Is it Hershey or Jersey Milk, et cetera? I mean, Mars. I'm giving little placeholder examples to prove that there are ways of market introduction that if you're controlling the input material and the oil extraction and the end type of input materials, you can do wondrous things. And yes, beverages. Yeah. So, and beverages, let's make sure the audience understands, it's much more than just non-alcoholic beer. There's many recovery, post-workout, utility drinks, spirits, wines. I mean, it's a whole host of opportunities. But if you don't get it right up front, you're never going to get the right dissolution, non-separation, all of the formulation things that the rocket scientists need.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of about the market as we sort of head towards day one of legal cannabis, and in terms of supply and demand, there's been a lot of talk. I certainly heard a lot about, the market is oversupplied, there's not going to be enough supply on day one, and I wanted to get a sense from you kind of where you sit on that spectrum and how Aphria is sort of ramping up for that day on October 17th.
So first of all, I'm very proud to say that all of Aphria's brands are now registered with every province in Canada. Some haven't disclosed the MOU quantities. We're all expecting this much from Ontario, and it's probably going to be this much serving just online for the next 6 months, which is okay. And quite frankly, feathers nicely into the Aphria story, because it won't be until February when all of my Part 4 and Aphria Diamond expansions are in harvest mode. So come February of 2019, I'll be producing a lot of cannabis. But from now until then, all the other provinces, there will be potentially a shortfall. And I say that because from my perspective, one province wanted 18,000 kilos from me, I could only commit 12. So that's indicative of us allocating by province, because we wanted to support all of our brands. And our brands span from speaking to the novice, the first-time user, the one that do I or don't I, to what we call the enthusiast, the Scotch and cigar user of many times a week. More the Broken Coast type of products. So for us, that's where we're at, and we have been I'm not saying turning down medical patients, but we have not been actively promoting, as we always have on a monthly featured basis, so that we can start to, quote, stockpile into the abilities of serving all provinces with all of our brands. So once we start all of our activation tactics, which is probably shortly, and the public media analysts who have been asking will soon to see exactly what's in store from the Aphria brands.
It must be keeping you up at night just a little bit, though.
Yeah, but it's exciting. So when I get to sleep, I can sleep good.
Good. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the business landscape. Being the business editor, I'm pretty interested in it. You know, there was some news this week about big investments from big multinational companies and Canadian companies, and I wanted to, you know, get your sense of whether you felt there was going to be a lot more of that, and whether, you know, there could even be some hollowing out of sort of the Canadian industry, which has been such a great story in the near or distant future.
So let me throw the hand grenade out there now. This is all about the big, bad US market, recreational. Truly, when you look at global entertainment brands, whether it's Constellation, et cetera, the end game for them is to look at the beta test that Canada allows global companies to start the journey, to really understand the space, the consumers, in a small way. I know $4.5 billion is not small, but nevertheless, it was a very good entry price for Constellation to do what they did, because one day, and I'm very clear on this, it's not if but when the US market moves from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 for CBD hemp, followed by CBD from cannabis, followed by THC from cannabis, eventually recreational. I mean, even Trump had a headliner teaser out this morning, casting aside Sessions again and basically saying he's supportive of it. So with that sort of conversation happening in Washington, it's the US market. So back to your question, I off-roaded a bit. When you look at the marketplace, a consumer in Calgary is the same type of consumer in St. Louis, Missouri. So to use Canada with a medical platform of quality underneath this, all is ACMPR, which is very key. To me, it's absolutely, it has to be stamped in the recreational model from the supply chain. But it's the abilities now to speak to consumers. What are their profiles? How do they spend their entertainment dollar? Where do they spend it? With who? When you get all of this in a tiny little country called Canada, when the big market is the US of A, and you've got a lot of entertainment type of product categories. Again, beer is one, spirits, alcohol, wine, the list does go on and on. You've got all sorts of energy drinks, utility drinks, post-recovery drinks, juices, the whole beverage market. What better way than to cut your teeth in a smaller way than in Canada? So to answer your question, again, long-winded, I apologize, is yes, there will be a continuation, and one should expect in many categories. So the beer, wine, spirits is one. Don't forget about those utility drinks, and don't forget about tobacco. Tobacco will wait until vape pens come, is my takeaway. Because that vape pens today, best guess is about $1 billion of the underground consumer money being spent is on vape pens, both disposables and refillables. If Health Canada doesn't bring them above board, all the provinces are losing a big whack of their tax revenue, although they don't want to talk about taxation. But that's what they have to do. Yeah. And so there's a number of different spaces that have been eyeballing this for a long time. I can tell you tobacco's been at this for over 2 years. Yeah.
I was wondering, the U.S. obviously is sort of, I think, probably the next big story, but I was wondering also sort of internationally, sort of what your thoughts and ambitions, and Aphria's ambitions are kind of beyond North America.
So like the U.S. is my long-term vision, what we're planning for. Why am I still holding on and somewhat fighting with the TSX in terms of Liberty Health Sciences? internationally, there are now 29 countries, I believe, that have medically approved for use. Certain chronic conditions, still limitations. Some are socialized medicines, paying up to 60%, some are nothing. Like Argentina's 100% for epileptic seizure control. It is important to understand the Aphria story started with pharma. Our whole DNA, where I come from, half my team is from there. You can absolutely build a business model just on the medical platform if you expand in the right markets with the right in-country teams and presenting the right stripes to, and it's just not Ministry of Health, it's also Justice, it's like in Argentina and Colombia, it's Ministry of Agriculture, like in Italy, it's the military. There's a lot of moving parts, but at the end, if you're committed and you strategically identify and align our story with those in country, there's a lot of wealth to be created. Do you know, I make more money on selling a gram in the medical market than I will under recreational. Yeah. That speaks volumes. I don't know if any other licensed producer will ascribe to that, but I know my books. And I can tell you that also resonates in other markets. Our pricing points actually are at the low end. A Canadian patient is actually paying on a low end when it comes to other countries, even Latin America, in again, Colombia, Argentina, Australia, Italy. Italy is like unbelievably high priced, Germany. So there's a lot of wealth creation internationally. And for the next 3 years, maybe 4, before the US does what I'm thinking they're going to do, it's the expansion internationally. So yeah, we're in 11 countries at different levels and stages of business modeling and planning, building greenhouses in certain countries with joint JVs. That's important. And where do you have cultivation is also important. I mean, a lot of sound bites out there. I'm building it in this country, in that country, in that country. But at the end of the day, where are you selling it to? I can tell you with a very high degree of confidence that eventually in 2 years, Germany will have in-country cultivation only. Italy will have in-country cultivation only. And I know people may not be as up to speed on the UK market as I am, but even in the UK, it'll be import, but eventually they'll want their own. Yeah. Because the health, justice, law enforcement, they can add the level of enforcement, of site visits, yank your license. If you're an importer, you're far removed geographically. So it's the economic benefits, it's the employment. So there's a lot of reasons. So when you expand internationally, one has to be very, very cognizant of what is the conversation inside their governments of the day. And as long as there's stability of government, work with that. Plan for the future. Work with what is the best takeaway and make your decisions. If you guess wrong, well, you're in trouble.
It's fascinating. Our time is up, I'm afraid. It was very short, but I really appreciate your candor today, Vic. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and thanks all of you for your attendance.
Thanks, Nicole.